If you're a big fan of eating and cooking briskets on the weekend, but you're still wondering what the best way to cook brisket is, hot and fast or low and slow.
Big thanks to PITMASTERX Smokers for sponsoring this video.
So there is a theory that I like to test today, because the theory is that if you cook a brisket hot and fast on a backyard cooker, you're going to get the same results as you have from an offset smoker. Now, if that's true, then we definitely need to find out. And that higher temperature is 140 degrees Celsius, 280 degrees Fahrenheit. So I just say, let's get started and find out. So I got myself some briskets. Look at this beauty. That's an already good looking brisket, but I'm going to trim it up just to make sure it becomes even prettier and so that it will render off the fat to the way I like it. You see, the hard fat on the brisket is not going to render off to perfection, and especially not in a backyard cooker, because we don't have that extreme high airflow. And that's why we need to take that hard fat off. I'm just starting with shaving off thin layers, and then I carefully work my way down. You can have a little bit of a fat every now and then. And one thing you have to take in mind when trimming up a brisket is that some of the fat runs all the way into the beef. So you won't be able to trim it off, but you will be able to take off what sits on top of it. Don't be afraid to take off too much, because that is all going to be either beef tallow or I'm going to use it for a burger. Let's flip this around, and you can see there's a lot of fat at the bottom. That's great if you want to sell lots of kilograms of briskets and make good money out of selling fat. Honestly, that's just waste. Now that looks way better. I got lots of exposed beef on bottom and top. Really good looking brisket. To season it, I'm going to use the PITMASTERX Texas seasoning. It's the perfect mix between salt, pepper, garlic powder, onion powder. Of course, you can also get the recipe off our website. A nice even layer of seasoning on the brisket. I want to make sure I season every part of the brisket so it looks absolutely perfect. There we go. I got both my smokers switched on. This smoker is set at a temperature of 140 degrees Celsius, and I've set it to smoke, so I'm going to load it up with my brisket. And the next smoker I've set up to smoke at a temperature of 110 degrees Celsius, which is around 225 degrees Fahrenheit. That's going to be slid in, door's going to close. I'm going to wait until I see the smoke start popping, and then I'm going to check after 3 hours to see what they look like. Hot and fast, low and slow. Is this the end of the low and slow myth? In the meantime, I will take all this brisket fat and turn it into beef tallow. It's the most amazing thing ever. So I'm just gonna cube it up, put it in the pan, and then fry it at a low temperature until all of the fat is rendered out, and you end up with a beautiful golden yellow beef tallow. Then I like to put it in a tray and put it in the freezer until I need it again. It has been 3.5 hours, and I just checked, and the brisket that has been running at a temperature of 140 degrees Celsius is now at a core temperature of over 70 degrees Celsius, which means it stops taking on smoke flavor inside the brisket. And as you can see, we build up a beautiful mahogany color. We don't have that dry bark yet. So here's the question. Do we keep on going and make that bark happen? Because in the end, that's the reason why we're doing the experiment. We want that high airflow to get that beautiful bark on the outside of that brisket. And my suggestion is just to keep going a little longer. It's still a little moist on the outside. And I think it can do with a little bit more hot air. So I'm going to close the lid of the barbecue and let it continue to cook. And while we're at it, we might as well check the brisket that has been going at a lower temperature. And as I look at it, I think it's doing a great job. It's building up a nice bark. I think we're getting pretty good results here. And of course, the core temperature of this brisket's not near yet to what it needs to be, that 70 degrees Celsius. But at first glance, it looks a little bit darker. And I'm thinking that it is because the brisket that has been running at a high temperature has been losing lots of moisture, rendering down fat, which has been dripping in the barbecue at a high rate, keeping the environment a lot more moist than the brisket that has been running at a low temperature. So it might as well be counterproductive that I'm having all of the juices running out of that brisket and getting it on the outside of the brisket. I'm going to let these briskets continue to run until I see a definite change or a need to wrap it up. It's been 6 hours since I started smoking the briskets, and now finally I'm getting the look that I was looking for. First, let's take a look at the hot and fast brisket. Wow, that is a beauty. I've got a really good looking bark on this brisket. We even have a little bit of darkness. That is absolutely fantastic. So the hot and fast definitely did its work. At some points I was having my doubts because it lost a lot of moisture and therefore it started sweating a lot. And that actually prevented it from building up a bark. But looking at it after 6 hours of smoking, it looks absolutely fantastic. Before I wrap this up, I'm gonna put on a little bit of homemade beef tallow. Look at that. I'm also going to put a lump of butter. I'm just going to stick that on the side because I actually don't want that to destroy the bark. So a little bit of butter here, a little bit of butter there, and we'll tuck that in with the brisket. Oh, that brisket looks good. The final fold. There we go. This is now ready to go back on the BarneyX smoker because I need to go all the way up to 92 degrees Celsius core temperature. Let's take out that low and slow reference brisket. Wow, it looks a lot different. The bark is much drier. It's totally different. A lot less moisture on the outside, which might be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. I really don't know because I don't think that the bark buildup is as good as with the hot and fast brisket. It doesn't look as pretty to me as the other one. But please let me know, which one do you think looks best? Of course, I'm adding a little bit of beef tallow and a little bit of butter, then wrap it up. And I was going back in its own smoker at the low and slow temperature. And this one, I'm also going to take up to a temperature of 92 degrees Celsius core temperature. It's now 8 hours into the cook and the hot and fast brisket is done. A core temperature of over 92 degrees Celsius. I'm taking it out and I'm giving it about 20 minutes or so just to get the most of the heat out. In the meantime, I'm going to set the barbecue to keeping it warm. Set the temperature to 60 degrees. Another 2 hours in and finally the low and slow brisket is done. Just doing the same procedure here. I'm taking it out. I was probing it with the thermometer and I get that feeling that there's a lot less tension in the low and slow brisket. So with the hot and fast one, I probed it to tenderness and it was tender. The temperatures were right there. It was a little on the high side. So with the probing, it was smooth, but the low and slow one, just a little smoother. I think that's worth mentioning. Of course, they still have a long resting period to go. And tomorrow we'll see if hot and fast is better than low and slow. See you guys tomorrow. Yeah. Good morning. This is it, the moment of truth. Which will be the better brisket? This is the low and slow brisket, and this is the brisket that we cooked hot and fast. Well, let's open up the low and slow brisket first. That is one super soft brisket. Looks absolutely gorgeous. Now let's take a look at the hot and fast brisket. Is there much difference? What does it look like? It looks totally different. They both got a nice wiggle to start with, and they feel almost fall apart when I pick them up. But there's a clear difference here because the hot and fast brisket has that little red color to it, whereas the low and slow brisket has a little less red to it. Now what I'm thinking is that the hot and fast brisket produced a lot of fat and moisture in the beginning. The fat actually burned up, where the low and slow brisket, the fat didn't burn up, and therefore I'm going to get a bigger smoke ring on the hot and fast brisket and a lesser or even no smoke ring on the low and slow brisket. Now it's getting cold out here. You can already see the fat turning hard, so let's slice into that low and slow brisket. Ooh, that's a good slice. Let's fold this open. Now that looks like a pretty tasty brisket to me. It's nice and juicy. It doesn't have any smoke ring as I suspected, and that actually means the barbecue did a great job of not burning the fat, because burnt fat is what gives you that smoke ring, but it does not necessarily taste really good. That is one. Oh yeah, that's what I was trying to say. You see the fat rendered down beautifully. Cooked to perfection, tears easy. Let's do a quick taste test. It's juicy and tender. And very, very tasty. Now let's slice into the hot and fast brisket. You can see the color difference. There we go. That is a beautiful brisket too. A little less smoke ring than I expected. There is some, but overall the brisket looks good. Nice and soft, just as a low and slow brisket. Let's taste it. I'm gonna compare it to the low and slow. Tenderness wise, juiciness, the briskets are both the same. But if we start to take a look at the bark, then there's a difference in flavor, in color, and actually the hot and fast brisket, it has a little bit of flavor of burnt fat in it. Now that at first bite is really interesting because it's going to give you a little bit more flavor. But if you eat more of it, you get a little bit of that burned fat flavor, which is not really enjoyable. Whereas the low and slow just has that beautiful smoke flavor. It's a little less pronounced, but you can keep on eating it and it's very, very enjoyable. So personally, I think that the low and slow brisket is better, even though it doesn't have a smoke ring. Let me know which one of these briskets you think is the best one, and then I'd love to see you guys, of course, in the next video.